What's up, people? Arya here. This is going to be the first in what will hopefully be a series of videos with specific subjects. We're going to get right into our topic for this video, which is villainy in video games. This is a topic that I've got quite a few thoughts about, and in regards to quite a few games to boot. So if you take issue with spoilers, be aware that there will be spoilers incoming for the following games. Now, the concept of what makes a good villain to a person is obviously subjective. To me though, I've noticed a kind of weird trend where a lot of villains are usually just good guys that took their goal a little too seriously and made attaining their goal into an oftentimes painful extreme that necessitated him or her being stopped. Or they're just a good guy that gets corrupted and their usual MO becomes a dangerous sticking point because now they're going to ridiculous lengths to achieve a singular focus, and that is all of their character. Of course, when these things are done well, a good story can still be told. However, I like to group what I feel are the most interesting types of villains into one of three categories. First, there's the villain by circumstance. These types are normally either good guys or they're straight up neutral on the scale of good and evil, until something happens that pushes them into believing that in order for things to be right with the world, a hard decision must be made. Second, there's the villain by choice. The villain by choice knows he's a snake in the grass. He or she knows that what they're doing is wrong and they don't care, either because to them their actions are just, or simply because they like the pain and suffering that their decisions can cause. Sometimes they're crazy, sometimes they're not, but when they're done right, they can be extremely interesting. And finally, there's what I'd like to call the intangible villain. This one is interesting, since instead of it being a singular person or monster or what have you, it's some sort of entity, like an organization or a concept that causes sweeping ramifications on the game's world as a whole. When any of these is done well, they can add a lot of weight to the story and its characters, but to be more clear, let's look at some examples. With the villain by circumstance, let's look at Breath of Fire 4. Before I push forward about this, let me just say that I wholly recommend this one if you've never played it and are a fan of turn-based RPGs. It's really solid. Now, in Breath of Fire 4, our villain by circumstance is the character Folu. Not to get into too much detail, Folu is a dragon god, part of an immoral race of beings known as the Endless, who was summoned by the current day iteration of the very empire that he himself built years before the events of the game take place. The summoning isn't perfect, and Folu is split into two beings. There's the character Folu, who's our subject, and his other half, the main character, Ryu. During the events of the game, we learn that Folu awoke under the impression that his empire would still be able and willing to accept him as its ruler, that he would be able to come back and be greeted by his subjects, and he could pick up where he left off. He's immediately met with force as soldiers from the current day foe empire inform him that they're on the lookout for him, not knowing who or what he is, and that they're supposed to either bring him in or take him down. During his travels, the force he's met with escalates. He gets injured a couple times, and on both occasions, gets found and patched up by legitimately well-meaning people. This gets offset by the soldiers relentlessly hunting for him, which results in Folu being on a teeter-totter of morality. He finds himself wondering if humanity is worth protecting and saving, or if they should be condemned, as well as his own contributions in the relationship between humanity and gods. It's during this that he meets a woman named Mami, who is immediately smitten with him. Responsible for Folu's second rescue, she takes him back to her village, makes up a story about him being a relative that needs a place to stay, and she lives with him. He helps the village with their labor, living with Mami amongst mortals, which of course makes his decision about morality that much harder to come to grips with, especially since he and Mami form a deep bond. The landlord of the village, however, out of jealousy towards Folu since Mami's all over him, finds out that Folu's a wanted man when soldiers come searching and he rats him out. These actions result in Mami helping Folu escape the village to evade capture, only to be taken away by them herself and use as ammunition in a magical hex cannon called the Carronade in an attempt to stop Folu. He's hit, her bell falls from the sky, it's the last thing he sees before he passes out, and from then on, he flips the script. His patience with humanity is next to gone, and now he's on his way to the capital of his empire, not to rule it, but to destroy it. and once that's done, he intends to move on to destroying the rest of humanity, believing that they're much too corrupt to exist in the world. Fo-Lu is a character constantly tugged back and forth by his thoughts and feelings about the world and its people, who feels that leading the world into the direction that's best for it falls on his shoulders, and he spends the course of the game trying to figure out how he should act on these feelings and why, with circumstances leading to his extreme actions, and is a great example to me of how a character like that should function within the narrative of a story. Next, we have the villain by choice. For this example, we'll use the character of Kuroiwa from Judgment. In Judgment, you play as Detective Takayuki Yagami, out to solve a multi-layered murder mystery where people's dead bodies are being found with their eyes gouged out. While multiple characters are obviously implicated as the murderer, the main villain working the majority of the gears in the background is Detective Kuroiwa, who for the longest time doesn't let on that he's a villain, because the scheme he's a part of requires that he remains hidden, and because he is a detective and that's a role he needs to continue to play for the eyes of the public. He is, however, outed eventually as being the mole that's pulling multiple strings. The murders happening turn out to be people that are forcibly being used as test subjects for an experimental drug known as AD9, which is being created to try to cure Alzheimer's. The problem is that these drugs have the unfortunate side effects of the eyes changing color and, death. So obviously they can easily be linked back to the creator of the drug, a duplicitous doctor named Shono. Kuroiwa's out for the fame, fortune, and glory that the successful creation of this drug can bring though, so he's the one running around getting his hands dirty very willingly. Once it's outed that he's the villain, Kuroiwa makes it very clear in later encounters with Yagami that he's not only 100% fine with the atrocities he's committing, but he will continue to do more and more, and because of his position on the chessboard, so to speak, no one will be able to stop him. This paints him as a villain willing to do the most vile of things to attain his goals without question, regardless of the issues of morality that getting to his goal might create in his wake. He's direct and to the point, and it in turn makes him a solid example of characters who choose villainy, as opposed to having it pushed onto them. Lastly, let's look at what I like to call the intangible villain. As the name implies, an intangible villain can't be plainly seen. It is normally some sort of organization whose villainy is known only to a select few people in the world, or it's some kind of concept that holds weight over many different aspects of the world. For this example, we'll look at the religion of Yevon from Final Fantasy X, or Final Fantasy X. Whichever you want to say it is up to you. You know, like Titus, Titus, and Titus. How do you like to say his name? Give me thoughts on that if you made it this far, please. I'm legitimately curious. Anyway, Final Fantasy X's religion of Yevon is an all-encompassing thing. A lot of its precepts that apparently must be obeyed are taught all over the world of Spira, and many people, even some of your own party members, are zealous believers in the religion of Yevon. The teachings of Yevon dictate a number of things that people are told to follow without being told exactly why they should, ranging from the pilgrimage of the summoners to defeat Sin, a massive space whale of a creature that kills people the world over, to the people of Spira being led to believe that the Al-Bhed, a desert-dwelling, nomadic sort of people, are sacrilegious heathens just because they use machina, or machines, which Yevon labels as forbidden. This affects everything from the various cultures of the world that you encounter to the dynamics of your party members, with the world around them and each other, and none of these dynamics is more infamous than the one pushed forth by the captain of the Besaid Aurochs Blitzball team, Wakka. Having grown up to be a devout believer in the religion of Yevon, Wakka was all for its teachings, but was at one point lenient about whether or not he felt like the teachings had to be followed to the letter. Then one day, his younger brother Chapu was killed by Sin during an operation where they tried to stop it. Chapu chose to use a machina instead of conventional weaponry, and when the operation failed and Chapu died, this sent Wakka beyond the point of trying to be reasonable. He became racist and openly bigoted, being completely against everything that the Al-Bhed stood for, condemning them as a race and a people without knowing or caring about what his words or actions might mean to those around him. This presses on even when Riku, a fellow party member and a proven friend, is outed as being an Albed, and his attitude shifts on the spot from being friendly and sociable to being angry, stubborn, and confrontational, with him even responding to her legitimate questions about why his views are the way they are by saying that nothing has to change when she tries to push for a peaceful solution. It's later revealed that Yevon's maesters, their main priests essentially, are corrupt, the pilgrimage to stop sin is a lie, and that Yevon as a construct is all sorts of flawed. But because their actions have been far-reaching in scope for years, they have a stranglehold on the populace, which creates friction between those who believe and those who know the truth, until eventually, everything is brought out into the open. From the world and its people to the part of your story centers around, Yevon affects nearly everything in the scope of Final Fantasy X's story, and we don't actually see a being named Yevon until the literal end of the game, making it one of the biggest cases of intangible villainy on a wide scale. That pretty much sums up my thoughts on villainy in video games. I don't really have a name for these segments yet, but if and when that happens, you'll know about it. That said, give me your thoughts if you made it this far in. If you watched and listened, thanks a ton, and I'll catch you again in the next video.